Well, folks, it is Thursday. It is about noonish, and I have four beverages on the table. This is Noshnika, and with me I have Shreya. Shreya, say hi to the people.
Hello, people. I'm Shreya. It's nice to see you. Not really, but it's nice to be here with you.
This is our regular show, Crafting SaaS, which you know that's the name of it because there's a banner at the bottom that says Crafting SaaS. If you didn't see it, that means you're not a true believer. It's time to talk about Crafting SaaS.
Let's do
Um,
it.
so there are three stores I want to talk about today, and uh, they're all things that'll be linked to the show notes. I'll go ahead and drop the link to this one in on LinkedIn and YouTube as we get into it. But the first one is from this guy's blog called Zeptonaut, called "Why is Selling Software So Weird?" And I this one really spoke to me. Let me get it
Yeah.
up on the monitor here. Turn off this banner. So Shreya, what's been on your mind this week? How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I mean, do you mean related to software or just in life?
Oh yeah, well, how are you doing with selling software? How are you doing with the SaaS world? What's been on your mind lately?
I think it's interesting. So, I haven't been in the SaaS world or in the tech world for too long, but I definitely agree that the process from my experience so far and talking to the sales team and everything,
Mm-hmm.
that like there's a large push towards like convincing people that it's worth their time. You know what I mean? Like that's one of the struggles that we have as well, where we're convinced that it's a very valuable asset and that's something that people can, save a lot of time using our software. But trying to get into people's mind and being like, hey, listen, this is something that is
This is
actually
why you
going to
should
help
care
you.
about it. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
It,
Yeah.
it, it really feels big. Now, what I feel like when we start talking about um, software sales and connecting with people, we
Yeah.
often kind of move. We're pretty far into the like what and what we're doing is hey, like we need to hit this number, we need to create this level of engagement, create this many users, and the real kind of basics of like what we're doing when we're selling software, that's kind of not mentioned. Like, and you'll see press coverage of software stuff where it's like, oh, this is bad because it costs more to produce, or why aren't you just satisfied turning a profit this way or something. And very often I think those things can be answered with some very basic reviews of what the economics of selling software are. And so I really loved this article because this is really like, before we're talking about SaaS or user bases, investment, all those other pieces, right? It starts with this question of like, how is building software like building a house,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, hey, you build something, right? You put together like pre-existing pieces, yeah, you come up with some kind of architecture, right? And so you would sort of think that they have some kind of similar economics, when in fact they have about the most different economics that you can have, right? I
Yeah.
would say they're quite different from selling like apples at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Even further removed is selling a house versus selling software. um
Mhm.
and so, okay, so let's go through this thing because I genuinely love it. So
I think there's, yeah, go ahead.
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, there's like a specific point. If you scroll down, I think it starts with contrast this with software. It kind of makes an important point about how like in the software industry versus like building houses and everything, when you build a product, if there's already competition out there doing the same thing as you, your customers aren't just going to default to using you because they aren't able to use that other software, right? Like everyone will gravitate towards the better option or whatever fits
Yes.
best for them versus for houses it's like you can build as many houses as you want even if you have competition someone's going to need to use your house, right?
Yeah, and part of the idea there, right, is that it doesn't matter how much I love the last house you built. When you come to me to build my house, I'm like, well, how much does it cost me to get this additional house? It's going to be whatever it costs to build a house, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a little cheaper because I've got a big operation, it's going good, but it's not going to be, oh, well, I can just give you an extra house for free, right? Whereas if you have an established competitor, right, in this case you mentioned Zoom, right? The cost of Zoom adding another user is almost zero,
Yeah.
right? So they can sell that additional, use case really, really, really cheaply, right? And this thing you said about marginal cost to produce one more unit of something, in this case, one more house, right? Is there's going to be some savings because you have some equipment, but it's not going to be this near zero marginal cost. And
Yeah.
it's funny that he does take the example of Zoom. A lot of the things in this essay could be about like software that you're buying on a CD, right? That's like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm going to install this software, right? Doesn't cost very much to print another CD, another copy of that software.
Yeah.
But we'll get to talk about this in a minute, but there is this side of like the service side where it's like, hey, Zoom does cost something, right, to add an additional user, and that's not extreme, but it's not without some consideration. And now she's
Yeah.
going to close Slack and not get the brush pick sound, which is always it's like Pavlovian. I'm just like, there's something I have to handle. Okay. So
I think the other point is to add
ahead.
to that is like the service part of it that you mentioned, where once you build a house, it's there. You don't have to worry about maintaining it. Versus for a software, you got to keep maintaining it. You got to keep improving it. You got to keep competing with other people. And B, it's usually not a necessity. Like it usually is something that people are using out of some sort of convenience factor. So again, like people will leave if they find something better, and they don't necessarily need to depend on you. So you need to keep convincing your customers to pay.
Yeah, so
You know,
this, when you talk about the benefit delivered, this was this thing that he kind of mentions that really stuck with me. This is where we get into the more advanced, or like the concepts that aren't just as simple as like basically everybody should be making software because the chances are that you can sell software to multiple people and make a ton of money. And of course, there's a number of reasons for this. It used to be that you had even lone developers getting like vastly wealthy. These days, because of some of the ways that the software industry works, that's not as applicable. But you certainly do. You have people making extremely good money on very small pieces of software. But when you hear that, you think, well, everybody should do software. There shouldn't be any carpenters, right? Everybody should be doing software. Well, here's kind of an important comparison. This is just rough, like an illustration of the idea that when you build a new home, how likely is it that you're going to create some value, right? I've seen homes built that should never have been built, and no one will. They're like zero value. That does happen.
Yeah.
Most of the time, though, it's some value in between here, right? It's some amount of value. I'd give this, maybe think of this as like a percentage of the cost of building, right?
Mhm.
Like probably 100% is probably way close in the middle here, or even over to the left, right? It's like you probably get back what you spent on it. But talking about the impact of building new software, right? Most software is a zero value kind of thing.
Mhm.
And there's two factors there. One is like either no one will ever give you a penny for the software, or an even bigger tranche, which is a lot of the software you write actually does not have any value to anyone. Like you won't get a penny, and also no one would want to give. No one likes it that much, like
no one needs it that much that they would go to that extent.
Yes, and when you sit down to say, when you think about like putting in capital as like a betting operation, when you go to build a house or do some land development, you can say this is either an okay bet, a not great bet, or a really great bet, right? Whereas most software bets are just completely terrible bets. It doesn't matter how good you do at it, right? There's going to be no positive outcome from it. I think you've had less chance to see this in your time in the industry, but you talk to people who are very passionate about projects, who see really big futures for them, where it just doesn't go anywhere. Have you seen a little bit of that already in your time in the industry?
Oh yeah, I met up with someone at a conference last year. I think that was like in between August to September. And they were just talking about how they've been working on this startup for like 2 years, something like that, for a decent amount of time. And how at that point they were at the meetup because they wanted to know what their next steps should be, but most likely it would just be coming to an end. And that's a lot of stories for startups. Even at our meetup yesterday, there were a couple of people that were like, yeah, I started this business, didn't work out, now I have to pivot.
Yeah. No, it's a very real part of the experience. I think about I've also had people who were like working on AI that would eventually get bought by Intel. This was a friend of mine. who his whole family, this was a long time ago, it's like 20 years ago, was just like, stop wasting time on the computer. You
Yeah.
know, like this isn't gonna go anywhere, your little chess robots or whatever. And yeah, that guy owns like a small private airport now. You know, like
Oh,
yeah, I
yeah.
remember like early Twitch streamers, a lot of them have these stories about like, what are you doing? You're like, stop it. Like, they're taking in this money or all this scholarship, and their parents are almost like, yeah, well, you just have to stop this. You need to go to college.
Yeah.
Like, this is
You
not.
got to know when to stop. That is important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about the one that always wilds me out is that there's all this advice about knowing when to like get out of a project, and hearing about the development of Stardew Valley. Have you read this narrative at all?
I have not. I've heard of the game, but I have not read about that.
So Stardew Valley was developed by a single person, and he spent years living with his girlfriend, not doing anything except working on Stardew Valley, regularly coming to dinner with her, being like, throughout the whole dialogue tree system, gonna rewrite it from scratch, just wasn't satisfactory to me, just gonna make this game perfect, that there's no indicator from anyone wants or needs or anything, and just for years they just kept the faith that this was going to be a big deal. His partner was, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was gonna ask a question in a slightly different direction, but how much do you think, since we're part of a marketing growth team, right? Like, how much do you think marketing plays a role in defining how successful it would be? Or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's an interesting thing. I think that a lot of the software that gets worked on, where I think of it as being way on the left side of this curve, it really is going to produce zero users. Right.
Yeah.
So, even if you're starting at a small startup, I think there's absolutely space to just say, how many users do we have? How many people are passionate about this as a product and idea? So I guess a couple of times I've worked with some people who were doing some kind of subtle infrastructure thing where it was still working on what the fit was with the market. Like, was this really useful? People had tried it out, but like no one was a passionate user. But that's where a lot of software is, frankly, it cannot get a second or third person excited about it. And it certainly can't produce actual users who like use it every day. But once you're over that hump, that's the real question this stuff is asking. Like, then secondarily is the question of like, once you have something that actually has value to people, then there's this thing of like, what actually gets used. And that, I think, frankly, we all have to acknowledge that marketing is a huge part of that it is very often really not about superior software. It's much more about what people are working on, what they know about, what they've heard of. I don't think anyone would claim that like Node.js is better than everything else. But it is very popular. And there's one of it is application of skills, right? Having to learn just one language. But there's just other stuff about how the market worked out and what people got excited about that really matter.
Exactly.
So I loved this whole essay, and again, we'll share the link in chat here.
Yes, I'll send it out. And actually, I don't think I can. Yeah.
Well, I dropped it. It's in. But again, we might even actually come back to this article in a later broadcast, because that kind of interesting to me about like, just think about the very basics about like how you create value for people and like how much value you create. But that brings me on to the second thing that was on my mind, which is just it's just a Hacker News thread. And I'm sorry that the text contrast is not great. I should like do some like CSS transform or something on my Hacker. But it's this person just talking about Google Ads and Google Business really, really hitting them hard.
Yes.
And, like when one person posts, I'm banned from something for reasons I can't fathom, I'm like, are you sure you're not racist? But let me tell you something. I've also had an account banned from Google Ads. There's like 12 other people who are like, I've been banned from Google Ads. I pay for other stuff with the same card for the same services, but now I'm like mysteriously banned from Google Ads. And so this really stands out to me for really just one reason, which is about the difference between software like on a CD as a single download and SaaS, right? And I think really, both of us are relatively recent, entrants into the tech industry, so we sort of live in SaaS, right? Like, I don't think either of us have ever worked at anything where it's like, oh yeah, just go download this software package and that's our product.
Yeah.
So part of this idea here is like that, again, in this nice idealized version, right, of selling software, not to click back through tabs. I'm sure we've got it in here some places, like, it's very cheap to add another user, right? And in fact, usually, like, classical economics, we think about like software's like that costs nothing to add another user, whereas the reality of Google's business is not quite like that. Have you had any like weird experiences with Google Ads or Google Business since you've started this marketing world?
Honestly, I haven't used Google Ads or Google Business directly, but I'm wondering if this is something that do they do it on purpose? Do you think it's intentional? Or are they trying to drive people away?
Yeah, I mean, of course, from Google, you never, for an org so big, you never know like,
Yeah.
quite what's going on. And I think that also, like, thinking about an org as large as Alphabet and saying like, hey, here's the real agenda is like, like, it pulls a lot of different directions. I think the real story is this: a lot of people have these very equivocal experiences with support and what is available to them. And this is not, by the way, I happen to know a ton of people who work in Google support. Y'all do great work, but I don't think anyone would say that project is over resourced, right? That there's too many people working there, that they have too much freedom and responsibility and all that stuff. So I think we can get an explanation there, which is that Google really wants to be in industries where this sort of classic software stuff applies, where there's all this money to be made and it almost costs nothing to add another user. But a Google Ads user is not that way.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it costs quite a bit to continue to support new users. And some of them aren't paying you all that much. The person posting down here who also got banned, they were just trying to buy $50 worth of ads with their credit card.
Yeah.
And then their account was suspended and now they're trying to figure it out. Well, how much money is Google going to make supporting this person?
Yeah.
Who just wanted 50? They even say on here, like, project has makes no money, has no plans for monetization, right? And I just wanted a little attention on it.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a tough space because, as you can see in our classical model, the software costs almost nothing to sell to another person. In this case, I think that many users using Google Ads cost more to support than they will ever make for the project. And that's a tough one. That's a tough one for Google to like unpick.
Yeah. I also think that's the other side of like just having such a large company where you have engineers working on various different projects versus had this been a much smaller company and they had like engineers dedicated to and support people dedicated to this one thing. This might not have been as big of an issue.
Yeah. No, in fact, that really stands out. It's one of the things I love about working in a startup, right, is that we get to focus on what people are really doing with the product, right?
Yeah.
And sort of all of our minds are bent upon it, right?
Yeah.
No, I think you and I have already had experiences where we're looking at very basic questions about the Courier product and experience and saying, how exactly do we want this to work?
Yeah. Exactly. And even if there are people that run into issues, either it's a minor issue that someone already has resolved, or the larger it gets, it's like a lot of people end up on the team end up knowing about it, right? Because everyone's invested in making sure that users have a good experience and customers have a good experience.
Yeah. And again, to be clear on this like article that we're, or this thread that we're going to link to, it's not about don't use Google Business, right? Google Business may be great for you, but it is interesting to see, like, starting from that idealized world of maybe Silicon Valley in the 90s, where it's like, oh my God, this is just going to make money hand over fist. It's much better than selling hardware or selling services. The reality is that very often the hardware, the software that people want the most is a service, and it does require some constant maintenance, right? And then, okay, we got one more story to talk about. Oh,
let's do it.
We're just giving him what he wants. We're just giving him what he wants, right? Which is more attention, which is, hey everyone, I noticed we were talking about anything in the world. Please talk about this. Which is essentially the privatization of Twitter, the idea of moving Twitter back from a publicly traded company to a private one. What's your reaction right when you see this story?
Well, I'm just here for the entertainment value. You know what I mean? I think I stole this line from one of my coworkers, but I just want to see what happens. Like, I'm so curious about how it's actually going to impact users and like the drama that ensues from it and the backlash that it gets and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I that I think is kind of my feeling too, where it's like,
Yeah.
it's one of those stories where, um, like if one story, if one, like a sci-fi universe is like Star Trek, where there are no bad people, there's no villains really in the story. This is like Warhammer. It's like there's no good people in this story. There's no one here where I'm like, oh, the poor Twitter board, like the poor
Yeah.
like, nope, you all deserve each other, frankly.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't hate you, I don't want you to suffer necessarily, but yeah, like, okay, you're all giving each other headaches, great, good for you.
Yeah. There's also
um
like the side of like what happened with Facebook where they just continued down one path over time and it just became irrelevant.
yeah,
Where I'm curious about if this change means that Twitter is going to, if it changes for the positive, that's great. If it increases engagement and everything. But if it does end up taking Twitter down the wrong path, then it opens up opportunities for other social media platforms to rise beyond that and maybe do things beyond what Twitter offers right now, right? So I'm
yeah,
curious
and
about that.
it kind of would be like, I want to be generous with, Twitter and its offering. It is interesting to me that, Twitter has had pretty basic technical bugs in production for 6 and 9 months running.
Yeah,
And it's like kind of wild. It's kind of wild that like Twitter has this position that is like really largely unassailable in this space. And it seems like, yeah, that seems a little surprising, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think, of course, Facebook has the role to play here, because if it was just Twitter versus Instagram, it would kind of be like, Twitter's great. Twitter's a huge success story. But the
yeah,
fact is that Facebook and a few others sit out there as having a lot more value than Twitter, right?
yeah,
On the market and in, especially globally, people's lives. And so, one of the ways to interpret this beyond all the like, personality conflicts or personality quirks involved is just like, hey, Twitter is not worth what it should be worth, right?
yeah,
It is not making the money that it should be making. And so,
yeah,
um, relatively, the stock is pretty, the capitalization is pretty low.
yeah,
You could not, no single person could buy Facebook at this point, but yet,
yeah,
it is conceivable to do with Twitter.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see. So, the real reason I put this in actually wasn't so much just sort of the the top level, like, oh god, oh, what does this mean? Oh, I don't want to give you any more attention. You'll just act out more tomorrow, Elon. But the other part is that we have these kind of three sequences of pieces. I know if you're like clicking the index on the YouTube, maybe you didn't see the first two. I don't know. Go back and check them. It was only 10 minutes. Take a little time. But we talked about, a very simple model of selling software where the money you make for the second and third and fourth copy is almost free, right? Because you have very little marginal cost. A more kind of classical software as a service, like we saw rise in the 2010s and is dominant now, which is, hey, every new user costs you something, right? You have to support them. You want to sell software as a service. You're not just making a one-time sale. It's an ongoing relationship. And then in the Twitter space, you have this like most advanced concept, which is this massive network effect, right? Of installed user base and everything. And I, like a lot of people, after some nonsense at Twitter, tried using like distributed tools like Mastodon and what have you, and then
Mhm.
just eventually drifted back to Twitter. Like most of the
Yeah.
people were on Twitter and had more fun Twitter bots and stuff. And so I was like, huh. So there's something there, because I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure you
There
and
is
I.
something
I'm
there.
sorry. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
No,
No,
no.
I feel like I remember when I used to use Facebook back in the day, like back in high school, right?
Yeah.
Everyone was there. Everyone I knew was there. I could reach out to people. We could make like group chats for classes and projects and everything. And there were a lot of different ways that you could use it. And I thought that like my life depended on that one app. But over time, as it kind of started becoming less relevant, at least in my community of the people that I was around, um, I like now I can't imagine needing Facebook and like needing to use it. So I feel like in the beginning it'll be tough because people that are on Twitter are so dependent on it and like getting their news and communicating with people and like hosting events and everything. But over time, I think that they're like those smaller apps that you mentioned might end up just improving and like solving the needs that Twitter isn't doing right now.
Yeah, I think that's pretty applicable, right? That
Yeah.
we want to see evolution out of the market, and frankly, like a relatively static thing like Twitter can be tough. It can be tough to see how that makes sense, and
Yeah.
you want to kind of see it continue to grow.
Mhm.
I will say that I think not mentioned in here is like 2 additions to this offer where he says, hey, I'm just going to pay this price that I'm offering of the stock, and if you don't take it, I'm going to sell this big stake that I got. And even has like explicitly, hey, I don't have a lot of faith in the current management of the company.
Yeah.
Which that one's rough. That one's rough because I guess the last thing I'll say about this before we sign off is that most of these software companies, even ones with huge installed user bases like Twitter, still largely exist on the quality of the people who work there and their ability to solve deep technical problems. Part of that's like the ability to run the code they already have, but also their ability to add new features and keep the thing running and all this stuff. So when you're out making really spooky prognostications about the future of the company, you're going to hurt that aspect of the company. And in fact, I have been around to even see, of course, much smaller than this, acquisitions completely sunk by the fact that a bunch of people just left. They got spooked. They said, "Hey, there's this danger," and then they're gone. And then the company's not really the company anymore. There's not really anything to buy or to have. Anywho, that was a downer note to end on. More cheerfully, we're gonna have somebody from Calendly on next week, so that'll be fun.
Ooh,
We're gonna talk about the SaaS experience, right? That's the theme. It's like that. The SaaS experience is much more about ease than it is about having magic features. So that's gonna be a fun one. We're probably gonna be back every Thursday. This is our first one that goes up on YouTube. Hi, YouTube. Don't be weird. Don't be weird, YouTube. Be cool. We've been with the LinkedIn people. They're very professional YouTube people. So, kind of maybe wear a polo shirt.
Stakes are high.
Yeah, try not to cuss. Don't drink coffee on your shirt or anything,
While they're watching the video.
Yeah, I don't know. Keep it classy.
They need to like
YouTube
dress up
viewers.
in a blazer and like a shirt
Yeah,
to watch
exactly.
the video. Yeah.
I don't think that's too much to ask. To ask for business casual in our viewers. Hey, you're just wearing an old like ratty t-shirt. Go change before you watch the rest of this video. We'll wait.
Don't be you. Just this is
don't
work.
be yourself.
Yeah.
Bring your whole self to work, by which we mean the part of you that is business casual. You can find me on Twitter at Cerberus_mom. You can find Shrey on Twitter at Shrey the Cray. You can see them there in our little tags. Shrey, do we have other stuff we want to plug for this?
No, I mean, if you want to follow Courier and know about what this little bird pigeon over here does, then you can check it out on Try Courier. That's our account on every platform, because Courier was taken. But yeah.
Try Courier, folks.
Perfect.
And do it. We really didn't. We did this. This is one of the ones where we barely talked about Courier at all. So we promise there's other videos on our YouTube that totally demo how great Courier is. So go check out the rest of our account to see those demos, and we'll probably have that stuff in the next show. But thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm hitting end broadcast.
Okay.